Prime Minister has defended his plan to curb immigration, saying he intends to end, in his words, a squalid chapter of rising inward migration. As he unveiled his measures, Sir Keir Starmer accused the Conservatives of doing incalculable damage to the UK by allowing the number of migrants to soar past 1 million since 2021. Well, joining us now with, I suppose you could call the right of reply, is the Shadow Justice Secretary, Robert Jenrick. Good morning, Mr Jenrick. Thank you for being here. Good morning. The thing is, a lot of people in this country have come to the unshakable conclusion that when it comes to controlling immigration, particularly illegal immigration, the Tories and Labour are as useless as each other.
Well, good morning. Look, I felt that catastrophic mistakes were made under the last Conservative government in managing the migration system. I campaigned as Immigration Minister for changes to that system and in fact secured the largest that we've seen in recent years. It will reduce the number of people coming into our country by 300,000 every year. And when I concluded that even that wasn't enough and I couldn't get more, I resigned from the government as a matter of principle.
Well, you're speaking personally, aren't you? I'm talking about government. I'm not talking about you personally. I'm talking about government and I'm talking about party. And both governments, as was and as is, and both parties, as is, are hopeless. You simply can't make a dent in it.
Well, I think you can make a dent. We have to acknowledge that serious mistakes were made over a long period, going back to Tony Blair, who was frankly the founding father of mass migration 25 years ago. What we need now is a fundamentally different system, whereby the public can actually trust politicians when they make big promises. That's the reason why I and Kemi Badenoch have advocated for a capped system of legal migration, where Parliament sets a legally binding cap. And so there can be no ifs or buts. We will reduce the number of people coming into our country back down to the historic norms, not the levels we've seen in recent years, which have put so much pressure on housing, on public services, reduced the wages of British workers, and have made us a less united country. But nothing that we saw yesterday, if I could just finish this point, nothing that we saw yesterday from Keir Starmer will end this era of mass migration. Nothing we saw yesterday will stop the boats. Nothing will get rid of the 1 million people that we have in this country illegally, get them out of the country, deport them back to where they came from. Nothing will get the foreign criminals off our streets as a matter of public protection and get them out of our country. This is simply going an inch when we need to go a mile. It completely fails to meet the moment.
Sorry, can I just interrupt? Because I'm not sure if you've had a memory lapse, but you were in government at the point where immigration reached its peak, almost 1 million in net migration to the year June 2023. And who was the Minister for Immigration at the time? A Mr. Robert Jenrick. That's you. You haven't got a leg to stand on, have you, when it comes to immigration policy and criticising the current government?
No, I'm afraid you're wrong there. The inheritance that I received...
What am I wrong about? Were you not Immigration Minister at the time of record immigration?
The levels that you just referred to are as a result of the decisions made by my predecessors.
OK, but were you Immigration Minister at the time of record immigration?
Well, let me explain, if I may. I inherited a system that was completely out of control. I campaigned and secured the changes that were necessary to improve the situation. It takes time for the data to show those changes. It is now showing that. And the changes that I secured will lead to a reduction of around 300,000 people coming into the country.
Mr. Jenrick, who did you inherit that system from?
Look, I don't pretend for 1 minute that the last Conservative government got this right. I've been painfully honest about that.
Because you had been in government up to the point of that record immigration figure. So you simply inherited that figure from a previous Conservative immigration minister.
I've said that catastrophic mistakes were made. I couldn't have been more honest about the difficulties that this situation has led for the country, and both of the main political parties have to share responsibility for that. The question is, what are we going to do about it now? And I want to see a reduction. I want us to get back to the historic norms of migration that we enjoyed as a country before this era of mass migration was started by Tony Blair in the late 1990s.
And one of the tools that you're suggesting...
And nothing that we saw yesterday is going to do that.
And one of the tools that you're suggesting should be used to do that is to make a cap legally binding. What does that mean exactly? What would be the consequences if any government failed to meet the cap that it had declared? What do you mean legally binding?
Well, ministers have to abide by the law, and so if ministers come to Parliament and Parliament votes on a certain level of migration, the numbers of visas being issued to different categories of individuals, ministers would not be able to issue visas beyond that point. And so it would be something that everyone in the country could believe for once was actually going to happen. Because the big issue here, which you've rightly alighted on and held me and the last Conservative government to account for, is the fact that politician after politician has made big promises and completely failed to deliver them. And that's got to end, because people are sick of the lies from politicians on immigration. That's ultimately why I chose to resign, because I wasn't prepared to be just another politician who makes promises and doesn't deliver them. And I think that's what you saw from Keir Starmer yesterday.
So a legally binding cap...
More dishonesty on this issue.
All right, so a legally binding cap would mean then that you reach a certain figure that you've declared, and that's it. No one else is allowed in, which would mean that presumably screamingly deserving cases for asylum would have to be denied.
Well, we're not just talking about asylum here, we're talking about all forms of migration, in particular legal migration. So it's saying that we will issue a certain number of visas and the business community, or whatever it might be, students, has to manage that accordingly. And that is the only way in which you can guarantee that we actually bring the numbers down, because time and again, tweaks have been made by successive Home Secretaries, and they've proven to be insufficient. That is what Yvette Cooper is going to experience. She's going to just join a long line in Home Secretaries where they don't meet their promises.
What would the cap be?
I think it needs to be as low as possible. I want the country to have breathing space now, after so many coming in recent years.
What number would you put on it?
I'm not the shadow Home Secretary. It's going to be set by my colleague Chris Philp and Kemi Badenoch in time.
What would you like to see? What would you suggest?
To the general
Let's say you have a meeting.
Well,
you have a meeting. You're discussing it this morning. What figure would you put on a piece of paper? Come on.
Well, I've been very clear that I want it to be as low as possible. I think the country desperately needs breathing space right now. But I'm not the shadow Home Secretary.
What figure?
That decision will be made by him and by Kemi Badenoch nearer to the general election.
All right, we're in the pub together tonight. What figure?
Well, you're tempting me, but it's not right for me to say that's a decision for others. But it needs to be as low as possible so that we can end this era of mass migration. I basically just want to get the country back to the levels of migration that we enjoyed for decades and decades before the late 1990s, when we entered this unprecedented period that's led to massive pressure on housing, on public services, has undercut the wages of British workers, and has made us a less united country.
For somebody who wants action this day, which you clearly do, I found it astonishing that you can't put a figure on the cap, but there we are.